For 12 years, prison number 7 sat in eerie silence, its crumbling walls and overgrown fields masking a sinister secret. Once a fortress of discipline, it had become an abandoned relic, shrouded in whispers of ghostly tales and forgotten tragedies. In the small northern English town nearby, few dared to speak of the prison's dark past, and even fewer remembered the mysterious disappearance of David Foster, a prison officer who vanished without a trace. But secrets have a way of surfacing. What began as a routine exploration by a curious journalist turned into the unearthing of a chilling crime that would shake the community to its core. The discovery of skeletal remains in the bowels of the decaying prison would set off an investigation that revealed not only the truth behind Foster's death, but also a web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that had kept the mystery buried for over a decade. Prison number 7 stood desolate in the middle of a barren field, far from any populated areas in a small northern English town. Once a symbol of strict discipline, the facility had become a relic of the past, its crumbling walls, overgrown vines, and rusted bars serving as silent reminders of its dark history. For years, locals avoided mentioning the prison, partly out of fear and partly due to the mysterious disappearance of a prison officer 12 years ago. The case had long been forgotten until an unexpected discovery brought it back into the spotlight. On a late autumn day, Anna Carter, a young and tenacious journalist, decided to visit the prison to uncover more about the murky stories she had read in old files. The scene before her was chilling and eerie, with thick fog blanketing the area and wild grass obscuring the path. As Anna ventured deeper into the abandoned complex, a sharp, nauseating stench wafted through the air. It wasn't the smell of damp decay, but something far more disturbing, the unmistakable scent of decomposition. Following the trail, Anna arrived at a small room tucked away behind the main building. The rotten wooden door creaked open with a light push. Dust-covered light streamed in through a grimy window, illuminating the oppressive and suffocating atmosphere. In the corner of the room, she spotted an old, battered suitcase. Approaching it cautiously, Anna saw that the suitcase was encrusted with dirt, as though it had been lying undisturbed for years. With a mix of fear and curiosity, she opened the suitcase. Inside were pieces of fabric stained with dried blood, and at the bottom lay a rusted hammer. The hammer's head bore faint marks, as if it had struck something hard. The horror deepened when Anna noticed a corner of the floor that appeared to have been disturbed. She used a stick to scrape away the thin layer of soil, and fragments of white bones began to emerge. It was the skeletal remains of a human, buried beneath the floor of this very room. Anna immediately called the police. Within an hour, the prison grounds were fully cordoned off, and investigators arrived with a forensic team to examine the scene. Inside the small room, the forensic team meticulously collected critical pieces of evidence. The hammer, the suitcase, and even the surrounding soil were carefully placed into sealed bags. The skeletal remains were removed and transported for forensic examination. The room was no longer just a setting for an abandoned story. It was now the focal point of a chilling crime. The body had been buried in a shallow grave, barely concealed by a thin layer of dirt. The stench of decay had permeated the area, but for over 12 years, no one had noticed or questioned it. The crime scene evoked a range of emotions: fear, shock, and an insatiable curiosity to uncover the truth. This was more than just a murder. It was the beginning of a mystery buried deep in time. With each piece of evidence unearthed, the ultimate questions loomed larger. Who committed this heinous act? And why had it been hidden for so long? The discovery of human remains at prison number 7 quickly drew attention, turning the long-abandoned site into the epicenter of an intense police investigation. By the next morning, the area was flooded with law enforcement, forensic experts, and investigative teams, all working meticulously to uncover the truth hidden beneath years of dust and decay. The first priority was to document every detail of the crime scene. Photographs were taken from multiple angles, capturing the suitcase, the hammer, and the shallow grave. Forensic experts in white protective suits carefully collected soil samples, searching for traces of bodily fluids or other organic matter. The hammer was placed in a sealed evidence bag, with particular attention given to its rusted yet blood-stained head, a silent witness to a brutal crime. The skeletal remains, delicately removed from their shallow resting place, were packed with extreme care for transport to the forensic lab. Early assessments indicated that the body belonged to a man in his early 40s. Multiple fractures in the arm and leg bones suggested the victim had been restrained or immobilized before death. The most telling sign, however, was the significant fracture on the skull, consistent with a blow from a heavy object, most likely the hammer found nearby. The shallow burial was another key point of analysis. Forensic archaeologists determined that the grave had been hastily dug, possibly in a state of panic or under time constraints. The thin layer of soil over the body explained why the stench of decomposition had persisted for so many years, especially during humid conditions. While the forensic team worked, detectives began piecing together preliminary theories. The victim's proximity to the suitcase and hammer suggested the murder had occurred in the very room where the body was found. The suitcase, an item once issued to inmates for storing personal belongings, pointed investigators to the possibility that the crime might involve someone connected to the prison, either an inmate or a staff member. The rusted hammer, though weathered by time, had preserved enough of its grim legacy. Early tests revealed faint traces of dried blood, and efforts were underway to extract DNA. If successful, this could confirm whether the hammer was indeed the murder weapon, and potentially link it to the killer. Detectives requested access to archived records from prison number 7, seeking to identify any individuals who could have been involved. The prison's closure a decade earlier posed challenges, as many documents were incomplete or had been damaged over time. Despite this, one name surfaced repeatedly in connection with disputes and incidents during the prison's operation: Robert Lang, a notorious inmate with a history of violence and mental instability. Lang had been transferred from prison number 7 shortly before its closure, but not before a series of documented altercations with staff, most notably a heated dispute with a prison officer named David Foster. Records indicated that Foster had disappeared under mysterious circumstances around the same time Lang was moved to another facility. Detectives began to wonder, could the skeletal remains belong to David Foster? And if so, was Robert Lang involved? The connection between the two was undeniable, but proving it would require more evidence. News of the discovery spread quickly, with headlines speculating about the identity of the victim and the potential for a long-buried scandal. Reporters, including Anna Carter, followed every development closely. Anna, who had initially stumbled upon the crime scene, now found herself in the unique position of both witness and journalist. Her reports painted a vivid picture of the investigation's progress, feeding public curiosity, while raising important questions about accountability within the prison system. To dig deeper, detectives tracked down former prison staff members. One retired guard recalled that Foster had been strict and often clashed with inmates, particularly Lang. Another described Lang as a powder keg, prone to sudden outbursts and unpredictable behavior. However, some testimonies also hinted at Foster's own dark side, alleging that he had been known to use excessive force on inmates, especially Lang. These interviews painted a complex picture of the dynamics within prison number 7, where tensions between guards and inmates often simmered dangerously close to violence. Lang's documented threats against Foster seemed to fit the profile of a revenge-driven attack, but detectives knew they needed hard evidence to substantiate their theory. The forensic lab worked tirelessly to analyze the remains and other evidence. Using advanced techniques, scientists extracted a DNA profile from the bones and compared it to existing records. The match was conclusive. The remains belonged to David Foster. This breakthrough confirmed that the missing prison officer had met a violent end, but it also deepened the mystery. If Lang had killed Foster, why had he been transferred rather than charged? And if not Lang, who else had the motive and opportunity to commit such a crime? The hammer, initially believed to hold the answers, instead raised more questions. No fingerprints could be recovered due to rust and time, but further testing revealed faint traces of a second person's DNA on the handle, someone who wasn't Foster or Lang. This unexpected finding threw the case wide open, suggesting that a third party might have been involved in the crime or the cover-up. The investigation had reached a critical juncture. With each piece of evidence, the story grew more complex, weaving a web of suspicion around the prison's dark past. Detectives now faced the daunting task of determining not just who killed David Foster, but also why and how so many secrets had remained hidden for over a decade. The skeletal remains unearthed at Prison No. 7 were officially identified as belonging to David Foster, a prison officer who had mysteriously disappeared 12 years earlier. The confirmation marked a critical turning point in the investigation, shifting the focus to uncovering the circumstances of his death, and, most importantly, identifying his killer. David Foster was not just any prison officer. Known for his strict demeanor, he had a reputation for pushing boundaries with the inmates. According to accounts from former staff, Foster was both respected and feared, a man who believed in maintaining absolute control over those under his watch. His rigid methods, however, often drew criticism, particularly for his treatment of one inmate, Robert Lang. Robert Lang, a mentally unstable and violent prisoner, had been incarcerated at Prison No. 7 for several years. Records and witness statements painted a disturbing picture of his interactions with Foster. Lang was frequently involved in altercations, many of which escalated due to Foster's heavy-handed approach. One former guard recounted a particularly violent incident in which Foster restrained Lang using excessive force. Lang never forgave him for that, the guard said. He'd glare at Foster every time he walked by, muttering under his breath. You could feel the tension in the air whenever they were near each other. Lang's documented threats against Foster, combined with his history of aggression, positioned him as a prime suspect in the case. However, the evidence found at the crime scene suggested there might be more to the story. Lang's sudden transfer to a psychiatric facility shortly after Foster's disappearance raised immediate red flags. Official records cited escalating behavioral issues as the reason for the move, but internal documents revealed inconsistencies. Communications between senior staff hinted at an undisclosed incident involving Lang and Foster, but the details were vague, as if deliberately obscured. Detectives began to suspect that Lang's transfer was not a coincidence, but rather an attempt to cover up what had happened at the prison. The question was whether Lang had been involved in Foster's death, or if he was being used as a scapegoat to hide someone else's crime. As the investigation deepened, another name came into focus: Andrew Harlow, a colleague of Foster's who had worked closely with him at the prison. Harlow was described as affable and easygoing, the complete opposite of Foster's stern demeanor. However, interviews with former staff revealed underlying tensions between the two men. One former guard mentioned a financial dispute between Foster and Harlow. Foster had reportedly lent Harlow a significant sum of money, and the two had argued over repayment shortly before Foster's disappearance. Harlow tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, the guard recalled. But you could see Foster was angry. He didn't let things slide easily. The financial dispute, coupled with Harlow's proximity to Foster on the day he disappeared, made him a person of interest. The hammer found at the crime scene initially seemed to tie the murder to Lang. As an inmate, Lang had access to such tools, and the hammer was linked to the prison's maintenance inventory. However, forensic analysis revealed faint traces of DNA on the hammer's handle that did not belong to Lang. The DNA was instead matched to Andrew Harlow. This revelation shifted the investigation's focus and raised new questions. Was Lang truly involved in Foster's murder, or had Harlow used Lang's troubled history to divert suspicion from himself? The emerging theory suggested that Harlow had killed Foster during a confrontation over their financial dispute. In a moment of rage, he struck Foster with the hammer, leading to the fatal injury. Realizing the severity of his actions, Harlow hastily buried Foster's body in the shallow grave beneath the floorboards. To further cover his tracks, he planted evidence to implicate Lang, knowing the inmate's history of violence and his hostile relationship with Foster would make him the perfect scapegoat. The suitcase found at the scene added weight to this theory. Issued to inmates for personal belongings, it had once been in Lang's possession. Investigators suspected Harlow had taken it from Lang's cell after the murder, using it to transport or hide evidence case took another turn when a retired prison officer, who had worked alongside Foster and Harlow, came forward with new information. He recalled seeing Harlow leave the prison late one night around the time Foster disappeared. "I didn't think much of it back then," the former officer admitted. "But looking back now, it was strange. Harlow wasn't the type to stay late, and he looked rattled like something had shaken him to his core." This testimony, combined with the DNA evidence on the hammer and the suspicious circumstances of Lang's transfer, painted a picture of a cover-up. Harlow appeared to have manipulated the narrative, using Lang's unstable reputation to shift blame away from himself. With each new piece of evidence, the story became increasingly complex. What initially seemed like a straightforward case of inmate retaliation now pointed to a deeper conspiracy involving deception, opportunism, and institutional failure. Detectives were left to unravel not only the truth behind Foster's murder, but also the reasons why it had remained hidden for so long. The pieces of the puzzle surrounding David Foster's death were finally beginning to align, yet gaps remained. Investigators now had two central figures in the case: Robert Lang, the volatile inmate with a history of conflict with Foster, and Andrew Harlow, Foster's colleague, whose financial dispute and suspicious behavior had raised alarm bells. But the question remained: who had killed Foster, and why? Detectives intensified their efforts, seeking to tie the loose ends of the case together. Forensic analysis of the hammer had revealed faint traces of Harlow's DNA, but it wasn't enough to build a conclusive case. Meanwhile, Lang's ambiguous role in the events left the investigation teetering between two possible narratives. Was Lang an unwitting scapegoat, or had he played an active role in Foster's murder? Investigators combed through Lang's psychiatric records at the facility where he had been transferred. His journals provided fragmented insights into his mental state at the time. In one entry, he wrote about nightmares involving Foster, cryptically describing the hammer, the suitcase, and the betrayal. While these details were chilling, they offered no clear confession. At the same time, a deeper dive into prison records revealed new anomalies. A set of maintenance logs showed that the hammer had been checked out by Harlow on the same day Foster was last seen. This new piece of evidence strengthened the theory that Harlow had used the hammer to kill Foster. Detectives revisited their interviews with former prison staff, seeking more clarity. One retired officer, reluctant at first, finally disclosed that he had seen Harlow and Foster arguing heatedly in the days leading up to the disappearance. "They were shouting about money," the officer recalled. "Harlow looked desperate, and Foster wasn't backing down. It got to the point where I thought one of them might snap." Another critical testimony came from a former inmate, who had been released shortly after the incident. The inmate claimed that Harlow often blamed Lang for various issues around the prison. Harlow would say, "If anything goes wrong, it's on Lang," the inmate revealed. Looking back, it feels like he was setting Lang up for something. These testimonies painted a picture of growing tension between Foster and Harlow, while also highlighting Harlow's manipulative tendencies. The turning point came when forensic experts re-examined the suitcase. Traces of fabric fibers were found inside, matching the uniform Foster had been wearing when he disappeared. More significantly, a faint smudge on the suitcase handle was revealed to contain a partial fingerprint belonging to Harlow. This discovery, combined with the hammer's DNA evidence and witness testimonies, provided the missing link investigators had been searching for. With the evidence mounting against him, detectives brought Harlow in for questioning. Initially calm, Harlow's composure began to crumble as the interrogation progressed. When confronted with the fingerprint evidence, his demeanor shifted entirely. "You don't understand," Harlow muttered. "I didn't mean for it to happen under pressure." He confessed to killing Foster. The argument over the unpaid loan had escalated into a physical altercation, during which Harlow grabbed the hammer and struck Foster in a fit of rage. Panicking, he buried the body beneath the floorboards and staged the scene to implicate Lang. "I thought if I made it look like Lang did it, no one would question it," Harlow admitted. Everyone knew he hated Foster. Harlow's confession also shed light on the prison administration's role in the cover-up. After discovering Foster's disappearance and the signs of foul play, senior officials had opted to quietly transfer Lang rather than report the incident. Their motive was clear: avoid the public scandal that would arise from a murder within the prison. By shifting suspicion onto Lang and erasing Harlow's involvement, the administration had succeeded in burying the truth until now. Harlow was charged with the murder of David Foster, and additional charges were filed against the former prison administrators for obstruction of justice. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, forcing a reckoning with the systemic failures that had allowed the crime to remain hidden for over a decade. As for Robert Lang, he was officially cleared of all suspicion in Foster's death. While his violent past and unstable mental state had made him an easy target for blame, he was ultimately another victim of the deception orchestrated by Harlow and the prison system. The resolution of the case brought closure to a dark chapter in the history of Prison Number 7. For 12 years, David Foster's death had been shrouded in mystery, his name becoming little more than a footnote in the annals of the prison's troubled legacy. Through meticulous investigation and a relentless pursuit of the truth, detectives had finally brought justice to Foster and exposed the layers of deceit that had hidden his murder for so long. For those who had known Foster, and for the small town that had once been overshadowed by the prison, the truth was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it came too late to undo the damage wrought by years of lies and silence. As Prison Number 7 continued to stand as a crumbling relic of the past, the case of David Foster served as a sobering reminder: no crime, no matter how deeply buried, can remain hidden forever. Justice, though delayed, had finally come for David Foster. The uncovering of his tragic fate not only brought his killer to light, but also exposed the systemic failures that had allowed the truth to remain hidden for so long. Prison Number 7, once a place of control and punishment, was revealed to be a site of unchecked violence, corruption, and a deadly silence that cost Foster his life. As the town came to terms with the revelations, the crumbling ruins of the prison stood as a haunting reminder of the consequences of negligence and deceit. For Anna Carter, the journalist whose curiosity reignited the case, the story was a testament to the importance of pursuing the truth, no matter how deeply buried it might be. Prison Number 7 may remain abandoned, but its dark legacy now serves as a sobering lesson. No secret can stay hidden forever, and justice, though long overdue, has a way of finding its path to light.